Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode on the Teens for Business podcast. I'm your host, Jack.
I'm Kylan.
I'm Jackie.
And I'm Ivan.
Today, we'll be discussing the recent bankruptcy of Yellow Corporation, a significant corporation in the trucking and logistics industry. And Yellow Corporation was an industry leader in the trucking and logistics industry and specialized in shipping and offering flexible supply chain solutions. Yellow Corporation held many small subsidiaries such as YRC Corporation and regional carriers such as New Penn, Poland, and Redaway, and more companies that were involved in local and national logistics. And Yellow Corporation had been struggling for years with financial issues and officially filed for bankruptcy on August 6, 2023, due to debt accumulated from acquisitions, heavy costs with operating their subsidiaries, and low shipping rates. So just to start off with, what do you guys know about the truck delivery slash shipping industry?
I can start off with this. Um, basically, I know that there's kind of a few methods of transportation for products, which is, by plane, which is usually the most expensive because there's not a lot of space and they use a lot of fuel, and by ship, which is really popular because it's very cheap and you can cover a large distance. But there's a problem when it's like over land because you can't really drive a ship over land. So by land, you can do plane or you can do truck and you can do railroad. And I think trucking is a very popular option because it's like sits in that it's cheap, but also you can effectively move a lot of goods. Well, compared to train, you can move more goods, but it's very slow and you can't really get the products there on time. So trucking is a very popular option. So I think in 2020 the trucking industry was worth around like 732 billion US dollars, and there were over almost a million truck drivers employed in US. And in 2020, and since it's 2020, we're in 2023, it's gonna be way more truck drivers being employed. And there's a lot of people who want to be truck drivers because they pay well and stuff like that. And it's a definitely still growing industry because there is no sort of alternative option. The alternative option is railroads, which is significantly, even though it is cheaper, but it's just significantly slower and it's not like a very feasible option for a lot of companies. So they'll keep on using trucking companies such as Yellow, which went bankrupt recently. So it's still a very valuable market.
Yeah, I'll take on from here. Something else I'd like to add is obviously there's like a lot of different methods of transport, like Ivan mentioned, but also within the trucking industry itself, there's like different types of trucking. Like I know like if we just go on the highway, like we see trucks, you just assume, it's like one giant thing. But like within the industry, there's like breakdowns. So example, like long haul trucking is what they call like obviously like long distances, right? Like if you're going through state lines or like just different like east to west, things like that. And then there's regional carriers, so like closer to home, I guess, things like that. So like the ones in the question, so like New Penn, Holland, those are ones are typically more like regional, like they don't really try to go like super far away from each other. And then also there's other things about like if it's a single person's load versus if it's like a bunch of things put together. So like if you have like a really, really big truckload of things and like the entire truck is yours, that's like usually another type of trucking called full truckload. And then less than truckload is more so like a bunch of people's like small stuff. Like if you order something on Amazon, like not Amazon specifically because they have like their own thing, but like just if you order smaller things and a lot of people's smaller things put together, that's what it is. So just like some things on that. And I think it's really interesting to like look at like the different types of industries within it because like as kind of the economy changes, you can also see like the changes and the shifts between like the smaller versions of them. And then another thing I wanted to mention about like the truck delivery industry, I guess as a whole, like specifically for like Yellow Corp, was that like kind of like similar to our last episode. You guys should check that out. But it's like very similar in the sense like there's a lot of like strikes and like union things going around. So in just like late July of this year, like the firm avoided like a strike from the union. So like there was like threats to go on the union, and then like the company agreed to pay like millions of dollars and like benefits, pensions, things like that. And so I just thought like it was really interesting to tie that back into our last episode.
Yeah, I definitely agree with those points. I think that, especially what Ivan mentioned about like there being multiple ways to transport goods, but trucking being like one of the most reliable ones, especially with the costs being relatively low, and also like it's just being a lot faster than if you were to ship it on rail and things like that. I think trucking and shipping is responsible for like majority of the freight movement across land, and into the manufacturing industries or warehousing industries, they all tie apart and they're all kind of interconnected. And I think also in the construction industry as well, I think just for the trucking part, they use a lot of trucks in the construction industry as well just to move around. And yeah, I just think that this is an industry that's going to continue to grow, and they have a lot of space for like different competitors to kind of move up and gain a share in this space.
Yeah, definitely agree. I also want to add that I felt like the trucking and shipping industry has kind of like low barriers of entry. Like as long as you're able to like start off, afford a lot, some trailers or some like trucks and some containers. Like I've seen a lot of like leasing companies like lease trailers and containers to the companies that want to use them. So as long as they can like be able to like forward those like costs, they can easily like somewhat like enter the market as like a regional carrier before expanding over to towards the national level. And definitely just like everybody has said, the trucking industry and the shipping industry definitely has a big effect on the supply chain. And speaking of the supply chain and the industry, Yellow had 8 to 10% of the American shipping logistics market share prior to its bankruptcy. And what do you guys think would happen to the logistics industry as a result of Yellow's bankruptcy? How will Yellow's customers be affected? And how could the supply chain also be affected?
Yeah, the bankruptcy of Yellow, I think, would cause the industry to, buckle down a little bit. But I think over time, the even though Yellow was like one of the biggest trucking companies out there, I think their load will be redistributed among the industry competitors. So um, like the Yellow's load would the customers will move to different other trucking companies and for their shipping needs. And I think that will happen, but in the short run definitely prices are going to go up because you know there's just simply less truckers. But as the industry adapts to one less company, then they'll buy more trucks, hiring more truckers, then the prices will gradually go down because um, the industry is just more adapted towards kind of redistributing Yellow's load, and the customers will be affected because I think some Yellow was like one of the lowest cost carriers in this sector, and other producers, other trucking companies have already stated that they're not going to match Yellow's prices. So the customers will have to pay a little bit more for their truck shipping, although it's not that significant because trucking in general is a very affordable sector. And the supply chain will, as I said before, like in the short run, it'll definitely suffer a lot. But in the long run, the other trucking companies would adapt to the situation. They'll hire more truckers, buy more trucks, and the supply chain will gradually rebound.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Ivan said, especially about like the effects on customers. I think something else that's like interesting to point out is that like if we look at Yellow like Corp, like the actual structure of the company before it went bankrupt, was that like a lot of its business model, like since 2000, I think like since the start of like this century, it hasn't been profitable a lot. I think it was like profitable for only a few quarters in like 23 years. And I think like that's partly because of like their business structure and like how they kept on like acquiring competitors, but like they weren't actually fully able to integrate that all together. And that's something to keep an eye out like for other companies, like almost like a warning tale of the sense of like what you can and can't do per se. And then I also think like because it was actually such a big company, like whenever something this big does like go bankrupt, there are going to be like just market disruptions in general. So like it's just like a void that you have to fill. And like I think because it's such a big thing and trucking is so important in like the shipping, like the general transportation industry as a whole, like I think definitely there's going to be other competitors like trying to like gain their customers over. It's not just going to be like, oh yeah, their customers are also going to fall off, right? Like the other companies in this area are also going to be trying to vie for those customers. And so because a lot of the time, like when we think like they're not really trying to find, like, we are not their customers, right? It's more of like the bigger companies, like the shipping things. Like if you place a product somewhere online, like you are not contacting the trucking company, right? Like that's, so I think like the general public won't see like direct effects. Like they might see their prices go up, they might see their prices change, but the average like person in the world isn't going to be seeing like the actual behind the scenes logistics, which is always something I think interesting.
Yeah, I think there's definitely going to be like a reorganization of kind of the market with Yellow stepping, like basically stepping out of the market. There's going to be companies trying to like expand their own market share. And I definitely agree that like as like more of an immediate impact, like with Yellow's bankruptcy, there's going to be more of like a kind of like a supply chain impact on in the short term. And I think other providers are going to be able to kind of capitalize off of that, and they'll experience increased demand, at least as customers decide like where they want to transition from using Yellow's services. And I think that this the main thing is definitely like the market is going to be kind of there's going to be a reorganization. There's going to be kind of like a switch up, and it's yet to be decided kind of like which company can kind of step into that bigger market share.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and definitely think that like on the short run, like it will probably shake up the supply chain a little bit, shake up the market a little bit, maybe cause like a reshuffling of like market shares, maybe potentially more the larger companies could take a little bit more, but then also smaller companies could catch up in the future. And then in the long run, like the effects won't be as felt as much because obviously like the market is still growing, the demand is still pretty high for these like truck drivers and like the shipping industry, so we'll definitely see that. Also, to bounce off of Jackie's point, I remember when two other like two similar corporations in 2019, I think they were called Celadon and Sierra England, when they went bankrupt. I never noticed that until like a few years later. I'm like, I haven't been seeing those trailers around, so that's definitely something very interesting that she brought up. And then another one of my questions is, what are some of the similar bankruptcy where poor management of acquisitions were like the root cause?
Yeah, so I think there was kind of this thing with Hostess Brands, which is the brand behind Twinkies, the very popular snack. And um they are obviously a very big company, a very company that you'll never miss at grocery stores. However, they have went bankrupt twice, um, and this is due to poor management of acquisitions and just poor management in general. And their most recent bankruptcy was in 2012, and they recently came back as they got acquired by another larger food company. But this, I think, it served as a good example of, even though a big company behind a really big snack like Twinkies, it's a very uh, a generic American snack, like very representative Americans. Like they can still go bankrupt because of poor management of like cash flows behind these acquisitions.
Definitely. I think that's a really interesting example. And then to bring it back to another episode in the past, I think it was one about Vegas. So Caesars Entertainment, like obviously it has grown beyond just like its Vegas industry, but like that company of like Caesars hotels, like that whole chain, like they own a lot of things there. They filed for bankruptcy in 2015 because it was just like their web of acquisitions became incredibly like just messy in a sense. And so private equity companies groups stepped in. And obviously like they're still up and running today. But that was like one case where like they originally weren't able to properly manage the debts, and they had like declining revenue and everything, so they just weren't able to come back from all of their acquisitions from like this management of so many different chains in such like a mile strip of land. So like that's definitely one example that comes to mind.
Yeah, for me, I think the one bankruptcy that like I really paid attention to was Toys R Us in 2017, and it was kind of due to like that heavy debt that was placed on them. That was a result of like a leveraged buyout by some private equity firms. And it was, I guess that was the main part, but it was also because they kind of failed to integrate their acquired businesses like eToys and it faced like increasing competition from retailers like Amazon as well. But coming back to like that leveraged buyout, it kind of left Toys R Us with a significant amount of debt on their balance sheet, and this debt led to like substantial interest payments, which Toys R Us simply like they didn't have that capital to be able to pay that off, especially with so much other competition in the industry that they're in. So that overall just kind of spiraled out of control and led to their bankruptcy.
Yeah, these are all very solid examples of companies that have like kind of like went bankrupt due to like poor like management, not just of the acquisitions, but just of their monetary like funds and like profits in general. Another example that came to my mind was Sears. And Sears went bankrupt a few years ago, and they were like really popular in the retail industry. And then they went bankrupt because not only because of like poor management, but also they also had a few acquisitions that were kind of not doing well, and also I read on an article that they didn't really innovate too well to adjust with the evolving market. So that's another example that I thought of. And then my last question is, how can these companies avoid these types of bankruptcies in the future as the market evolves?
Yeah, so I think one important factor is definitely focusing on the cash flow, because even though like cash flow statement is kind of undervalued compared to a balance sheet or income statement for investors and companies, it's very important to manage that cash flow, to see that even though the cash there's a lot of cash flow going out because your company is growing, but you have to make sure there's enough cash flows coming in so you can keep that growth and prevent yourself from going bankrupt. And also a very important thing is um, getting just simply hiring better management, because a lot of these companies, they suffer through problems such as like bribery or nepotism, and those are problems that are going to occur in a company, and that will cause a company's downfall at a certain point in time. And I think um, a very good company would have certain measures in place to prevent these things from happening, and then making sure they're hiring the right people for the right jobs, especially in finance, legal, and management parts of the company. So to make sure these cash flows are maintaining the company, making it stay alive.
Yeah, I agree with that point, definitely. And I think like just as a whole, being able to like evaluate your company and go like realistically off of that, because going back to like our original topic of conversation, like Yellow, they only had for like 23 years since 2000 had like a few profitable quarters, which it was not exactly a good sign. So I think like the fact that they continue to have like a bunch of acquisitions, and like I understand that that's probably like they were trying to help that. Obviously, like, they weren't just like, oh, let's just do more. Like obviously they were trying to solve issues, but like I think being able to like look at your company and like okay, is this really actually the best way to go about things? That's important. And then also like if the plan is to like acquire more, like to do more things like that, ensuring like kind of like what Ivan said, like making sure your team is right, but also making sure like the integration is correct, because that's kind of where a lot of like the failures were. Like just the companies that they acquired, or like the companies, things like that for acquisitions, they just didn't blend well together, or like people didn't really think of them as one, and that just fell apart there. And that can have really, really consequential effects in the long run. So definitely like having that whole process planned out is important.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I also think that in terms of just straight up avoiding bankruptcies, a main thing is probably just solid financial management and like overall management of the company. Maintaining like that solid gap between like that debt, your debt and your equity. I think companies need to like just focus on that, and then avoiding excessive leverage, of course, like through leverage buyouts, as we've seen with Toys R Us. So like the companies doesn't go into substantial debt, and just in case like the market isn't exactly like thriving, because sometimes you don't have that the capacity to be able to pay off that debt, and you're ultimately going to lead to bankruptcy. And I think another way to kind of be solid financially is to kind of diversify your revenue streams and your customer bases to kind of reduce dependence on a single source of income. So you're not just solely relying on one thing, so you're kind of safe in case something does happen, like a pandemic or something like that. So you just want to be able to diversify.
Yeah, these are all very solid points. So definitely like avoid bankruptcy and like for example like managing like funds like well that's obviously a very like important part. If you don't do that well, then the likelihood of you getting bankrupt is a lot like easier, and also like diversifying your like sources of income so you can adjust to different like supply chain like developments. For example, if a supply chain is like I guess like not operating as well, it's broken due to like a certain event, then you have another way of like making like that sort of money. I feel like what also went wrong with Yellow, as what Jackie has talked about, is that like they had like a really like low cost model. Definitely like they prioritized the low cost so they could have like the ease of like operating with their like partners. But however, that probably low cost wasn't very sustainable because as they acquired more and more companies, like they couldn't like they didn't have enough like financials to like make to like to like sustain themselves. Like they obviously only had a few profitable quarters across a 23-year like span, which is not very good. So that's definitely so that leads to one of my like points, which is like definitely when you're deciding to do a merger and acquisition, definitely you need to like look at, oh, is this going to be like profitable for the company? What are the costs of operating that company that you're planning to acquire? Those are some very important things that you need to look at. And so that's it for our episode on the bankruptcy of Yellow Corporation. Thank you for tuning in to the Teams for Business podcast, and we'll see you next week.